Hi friends, Andrew here. Somewhere in the middle of Wisconsin, driving back from Minneapolis to Chicago, and I wanted to share some live reflections on what I have experienced and what I have witnessed in Minneapolis with a movement of faith leaders who came together to actively protest the authoritarian behavior of ICE and the Maga regime and white Christian nationalist religion. And as some of you know, my preferred form is writing, and especially long form writing. But at this time, I wanted to reflect in this more spontaneous, uncrafted form. And I just want to thank you for sharing this journey with me and reflecting with me about the meaning of authentic faith and the quest to tell the truth and to practice courage and ultimately to become humans of love. So I have a few thoughts that I want to share. The first is I drove up to Minneapolis Wednesday night after giving a teaching for a cohort of peacemaking pastors. As I drove from Chicago to Minneapolis, there was a severe snowstorm, and it felt symbolic of what we are in right now. Very precarious roads, dark, very little visibility, slippery, a sense of hypervigilance and the presence of danger, and the need for great intentionality simply to try to get where we're going. So the drive itself was just very symbolically interesting to me because of that snowstorm and the precarity of being on the road and the need to be able to cooperate with other drivers on that road. When I arrived in Minneapolis and got just a couple hours of sleep, and then I walked to the place where we were meeting as faith leaders. It was about an hour walk. It was about 2.5 hours. It was just when the sun was rising in Minneapolis, and I was walking quite close to where George Floyd was murdered and where Renee Good was murdered, and I was it was early enough that I was just really one of the only people on the sidewalk and on the road, and there was just a sense of peace in the city and a sense of beauty in the city that did not represent the accusations of Minneapolis as this kind of war zone that has to be occupied and shut down for the safety of American cities. I was walking through beautiful neighborhoods with people getting up and driving their cars to take their kids to school and to go about their work. And recognizing, of course, that the presence of ICE and the authoritarian politics of Maga has made Minneapolis look like a war zone, with people being smashed in their vehicles and their doors being broken down, and a woman who's identified as autistic being yanked out of her car, and a small boy being detained as some kind of dangerous figure to bait his parents, and of course the murder of Renee Good at the hands of Jonathan Ross in broad daylight. So just interesting to walk through this city that has become a flashpoint in our society and in global media, and to see early in the morning a sense of peacefulness and a sense of beauty and a sense that these are neighborhoods where people live and where they cooperate and where they desire to have a decent life together. I want to comment on the content of the gathering of faith leaders. There was about 500 of us that I could count in this church. And I was astonished by what I witnessed. And I witnessed a kind of Christianity, a kind of Jesus-oriented spirituality that terrifies white Christian nationalism. I witnessed a kind of Christianity that puzzles and baffles and exasperates much white evangelical Christianity. And I was able to see why that is, because the majority of the people who were on the stage were women. Many of them were queer people. They were native spiritual leaders who were talking about our connection to our ancestors, those who have come before us, the sacredness of the earth and the molecules of our bodies. There was the poet laureate of Minneapolis who read just a magnificent poem to us, who was talking about the importance of sweetness and of softness and of sensuality and of being deeply rooted in our bodies. There was this lack of fear of the body, a lack of fear of the earth, and this deep sense of the sacredness and the delightfulness of being these small embodied creatures who can only be related to in a fruitful way through gentleness. And this was the thing that these spiritual leaders, these faith leaders, these clergy, they spoke in a way that had unmistakable spiritual power. There was a live wire, a charge, an energy in that room that I think any spiritually perceptive person could feel. And at the same time, there was zero sense of aggressiveness. There was rather gentle power. There was no sense of a kind of toxic anger. There was moral rage expressed. And by moral rage, I mean a sense of what is truly important and sacred, and the obligation for that not to be violated without resistance. But there was no toxic anger. There wasn't sarcasm. There wasn't contempt or mockery or trying to make people seem small. These spiritual leaders were clearly people who had outgrown that kind of adolescent insecurity of needing to insult, to label, to mock other people in order to feel big. It reminded me of the statement, I can't remember if it's Toni Morrison or Maya Angelou, who said that someone who needs to stand on the backs of others in order to feel tall has a serious problem. These were people who had clearly done the work of being healed from that kind of energy. And another thing that I noticed about these folks was there was a real expression of grief. These were people who were not afraid to express the sadness that they were feeling in seeing children being treated by ICE agents in such a reprehensible way. These were people who were not insecure or allergic to talking about the deep sorrow that lived in their bodies, having neighbors who felt like they can't go to the grocery store to get food because they're afraid of being arrested, or they can't go to their jobs for fear of arrest and so they can't pay their rent, and that being evicted in a city where the temperatures can drop to negative 20 degrees like they are today, that being evicted is a death sentence. And these people had the emotional honesty and courage to express the deep grief and the sadness of witnessing these moral evils. And yet they did so without a sense of self-pity, or without a sense of victimhood, or without a sense of a poor us, look how everybody's coming to get us. Instead, they communicated their rage, their grief, with an unmistakable sense of faith and power and hopefulness. that I found so beautiful. And this kind of spiritual energy is the antithesis of white supremacy, where power is one's capacity to intimidate. Power is one's capacity to dominate another such that they submit, such that they become silent, such that you can have a unilateral relationship with other human beings instead of a deeply mutual, participatory, vulnerable, and accountable relationship. This was black power present. It was brown power present. It was a green power that was present. It was a purple power that was present. It didn't have the musty insecurity of white supremacy, and I just found witnessing it so delightful, so weighty and robust and full of responsibility, but also delicious and enjoyable and freeing. And I just thought, I grew up as a kid being told that I should fear these people, native people talking about the ancestors, God forbid, queer people presenting themselves with their pronouns, or women who are showing up on the stage and speaking with such boldness. And I thought, yes, I was told these people are heretics, that these people are dangerous, that they're leading us down the slippery slope to hell precisely because we are afraid of losing a monopoly on power that is characterized by arrogance, by aggression, by the need for control and conformity. And here, a different way is being shown of honest presence, of rejoicing in what Paul called the fruit of the Spirit: gentleness, patience, kindness, goodness, self-control, the capacity to articulate rage, but without that kind of dirty energy, anger, the capacity to express grief, but without this becoming a self-pitying victimhood of look how the whole world is against us, and the capacity to communicate joy and hope without the need to become triumphalistic of look how we're the winners and we're going to beat other people and we're the best, and if only people could have what we have, then they would truly be happy. No, this was free of that kind of competitive, comparative energy for the truly collaborative energy of a shared joy, a shared faith. And I found that just so refreshing, just so Jesus, just so unmistakably the presence of the friend of sinners, the lover of the outcast, the one who brought women into the center of his movements and his work. Jesus, clearly the child of Mary, the young man who had been influenced by the liberation singer, who had a boldness and indeed who had a kind of headstrong lust for change, and yet was the contemplative mystic who could treasure things in her heart and could bear witness to the murder of her son with grief, but with calm. So I noticed that. Another thing that I noticed about these spiritual leaders that I thought was just so exemplary, just so paradigmatic, was that these are people who are doing courageous work. They are working full-time jobs, and they are organizing networks to help people get groceries and legal care and money to pay their rent, and to look for jobs that have been lost, to look for loved ones who have been disappeared, to go through the mental health care and spiritual care of processing the trauma of having been brutalized by ICE, by having lived with the normalized domestic terrorism of the political spectacle that has become our everyday life on social media, of seeing agents in masks with weapons brutalizing ordinary people. These people are doing things that you might be tempted to call heroic, that you might be tempted to call supermanish or superwomanish or superhumanish. And yet they kept emphasizing that they're not extraordinary and that they're not doing extraordinary work. They're rather ordinary people doing ordinary things that anybody with a sense of basic moral conscience and love for God would do, because it is good and it is right and it is for our shared welfare. And I couldn't help but notice that these people these faith leaders were embodying a quality of presence that is exactly the opposite of American exceptionalism. If you listen to our dear brother Steve Bannon, or our dear brother Charlie Kirk, God rest his soul, or our dear brother Donald Trump, or our dear brother J.D. Vance, or our dear brother Franklin Graham, they have such an obsessive need to talk about how America is the greatest and the best and the biggest, and how we're doing things that have never been done like this before in history, and that it's faster and stronger and more amazing. And you can tell that these dear human beings are absolutely addicted to exceptionalism. And if they don't feel like they're bigger and better and taller and stronger than someone else, that they somehow feel like they don't have enough. And I would say that these spiritual leaders in Minneapolis who came together, they were modeling for us a basic humility and groundedness in their own finitude that was exemplary but not exceptional, that was inspiring but not extraordinary. They were instead offering us an invitation into a way of being human that we can all share. One of my dear friends is reminding me that it's important not to be texting and driving. Hello, Robin. I am pulled over on the side of the road in a rest stop, but the reminder is welcome. So these spiritual leaders, they embodied a way of being present that I just found so, for lack of a better word, sustainable. It reminds me of Jesus' expression in the Beatitudes, "Blessed are the non-violent, because they will inherit the earth." Jesus is talking about a quality of being human that is so alive and that is so enduring that it can help make the world new. It's everlasting, not because it is imperial, not because it is white-knuckled, gripped on power. It inherits the earth because it's alive, and it makes the world beautiful and fruitful and safe and rich. Another thing that I wanted to say, dear friends, is in Romans chapter 13, that very, very important text in our time, Paul says something so significant that we almost never seem to quote when we're talking about Romans 13. He says, love is the fulfillment of all law, because love does no harm to a neighbor. That when you truly become a person of love, you become a harmless presence. You become a radically safe presence in which others can speak and live and act without the fear and intimidation of being cut down or mutilated or cheapened or belittled. And when I was in the presence of these dear spiritual siblings, I felt that radically powerful harmlessness. It was not weakness. It was rather a quality of strength that is so composed that it doesn't need to be harmful in order to be impactful, that it doesn't need to be harmful in order to be taken seriously, that it doesn't need to be intimidating in order to be authoritative. It has its own kind of self-evidence, its own kind of self-witness. I would call it its own integrity, the eloquence of its own nature. And I just delighted in witnessing this, and it was so fun because there were, quote unquote, significant people there. Reverend Bud was there, the preacher in the National Cathedral that President Trump was so unsettled by and so upset by that he went on a rampage to try to take her down because she had preached on the Beatitudes that we are called by Jesus to be people of mercy, and you had Congress people introducing motions in the Congress that she should apologize to the president for preaching such a political message that you should be a person of mercy, the Jesus 101. She was there, and David Black was there, the pastor from Chicago who was famously pictured being shot in the head by ICE at the Broadview Detention Center by a pepper ball. Mark Laverton was there, the former president of Fuller Theological Seminary, one of the most influential theological institutions in the United States. Our sister Valerie Kaur, the Sikh spiritual leader and writer and leader of the Revolutionary Love Movement, she was there, and yet there was no sense of celebrity whatsoever. There was no sense of anyone being especially significant and worthy of attention. In fact, these people never appeared on the stage. They never said a word through microphones, and I just found that so lovely, that there was no need in this gathering of faith leaders to present some appearance of celebrity or some appearance of self-importance. So what I'm reflecting on right now is the quality of a Jesus movement, the quality of a spiritual movement, the quality of a Christian, ecumenical, big house, hospitable movement that I think is deeply beautiful, but it is threatening, baffling, alarming, dangerous to white supremacist Christianity, white nationalist Christianity, white Orthodox Christianity that is so obsessed with being right and being in control that we miss the very content of what Jesus and Paul and the Apostle John and others taught as the way of life and the way of truth. Now I want to reflect, friends, on our direct action, nonviolent direct action this morning at the Minneapolis St. Paul International Airport. We went through an extensive training about how to engage in direct action. If you're not familiar, direct action means a public collective action that is meant to confront state power with moral power for the sake of staging what our trainers called moral crisis, to bring to the attention of the public the evil that is taking place in our society, the injustice that is taking place in our society by non-violently, harmlessly asserting our presence in a public space against the normalization of inhumanity. And we chose to go to the international airport because this airport is where ICE agents have been coming and going. This airport is where partners and cooperators with ICE are doing business. This airport is where 2,000 of our neighbors have been taken away and disappeared by Signature Aviation, including, friends, we need to hear this, we need to know this. Our neighbors who were working in the airport were detained by ICE in the airport and put on airplanes and taken away from their homes in that airport while working there and contributing to the functioning of this institution where people in this country can move about and live their lives and do their work. So we felt a moral obligation to go to this institution and to stand in front of Terminal 1, which is the terminal where Delta Airlines and where Signature Airlines operates, and to assert our presence without any violence and in a spirit of prayer and of song and of joy, to say we will not be silent or passive when this great evil is taking place in our society. And this morning we showed up at a beautiful church in Minneapolis, and we gathered together, and we had a moment of grounding to the earth, to the very core of the earth, and reminding ourselves that we cannot be moved when we are anchored in the presence of God and in our bodies and in the earth and with one another. And then we got on buses, and I was sitting next to my friend Diana, who is a Iraq war veteran who, while on duty in Iraq, had an encounter with a Muslim woman in her home, in which Diana, a follower of Jesus, had this mystical encounter with the nonviolence of Jesus, and of all places in Iraq, she becomes a nonviolent practitioner of the way of Jesus. She and I are sitting together in the bus, holding hands, holding silence and breathing together to ground our spirits and our bodies in this direct action of nonviolence, to bear witness to the way of Jesus that is truth, love, and justice. And then when we arrived, we began walking through the airport to Terminal 1, and there were lots of police there, and we greeted them, and we thanked them for their presence there and the service that they were providing in that space. And then we made our way to Terminal 1 out into the roadway, and we locked arms in a spirit of solidarity and shared presence. And we began to sing together a song that says everyone has a right to live, everyone has a right to love, everyone has a right to dream, everyone has a right to learn. And there was a spirit of joy in our marching. We began walking forward down that road together as about 100 faith leaders with many hundreds of other protesters on the sidewalk beside the road. And friends, the thing was, we were engaging in an action that was confronting what many are calling a kind of American Gestapo, or a kind of American slave catcher police force, a secret police, a power that has shown its willingness to shoot a woman in the face and call her a fucking bitch, and to terrorize children and elders in the most reprehensible, disgraceful way. And yet as we marched, there was a spirit of joy. There was a spirit of happiness. There was a spirit of trust, because our action was being done not in a spirit of conflict, not in a spirit of tearing down, not in a spirit of diminishing contempt, mockery, but rather in a spirit of bearing witness to truth, love, and justice, the dignity of every human life that must be treated with reverence, with respect. And we marched on in negative 20-degree weather, in the awareness that the airport police could show up, the county sheriff's police could show up, ICE could potentially show up. And then we lined up in the street, and we continued singing together in a spirit of joy. And I had the privilege of leading us in the Lord's Prayer. This was the prayer that Jesus taught at the beginning of his public movement. It's the one spiritual practice that Jesus ever gave. This was the spiritual practice of the Jesus movement. And you can tell in this context just how fresh it is. Our Father. Jesus taught us to pray to the one who makes us we, who makes us family, who makes us siblings, who makes us kin. Hallowed be your name. This is a God who is not our tool, who is not our weapon, who is not our mascot, who is not our puppet, who is not our ventriloquist. This is the God of transcendence, whose name must be hallowed, respected, embraced with the radical mystery of the unknowable transcendence of God. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. This transcendent God who makes us we and calls us beloved invites us into the work of cultivating mutual relationships, of flourishing in our world, the coming of the kingdom of God, the presencing of our unconditional belonging and belovedness in God. But Jesus doesn't stop there. He says, give us today our daily bread. This petition for our basic needs to be met, for the hunger of our bodies with their biological functions to be satisfied. This is really the spirit of what brought us to this airport, was the desire for people to have food, for people to have shelter, for people's cars, and for their clinics and for their classrooms to be safe spaces where the basic needs of human life can be served. Give us today our daily bread. Forgive us our sins as we forgive those who sin against us. This is a spiritual practice of Jesus, of self-awareness that acknowledges our imperfection, our fallibility, our need for humility, our hummus, our groundedness in the earth, our embrace of that holy smallness of being human, and recognizing it in the same way that people like ICE need a lot of forgiveness, that Donald Trump needs a lot of forgiveness, that Maga Christianity needs a lot of forgiveness, that if we want to be forgiven, then we need to be those who would give that forgiveness, like Jesus says with his dying breath, Father, forgive them, they don't know what they're doing. And so the spirit of our public action is that of generosity, is that of empathy and the desire for our mutual healing. Don't lead us into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Jesus is talking about high stress, fight or flight situations where we're so tempted to begin behaving with reactive energy. Jesus says, deliver us from that. Allow us to premeditate peace so that when we are in high stress environments, we can be a presence of regulation, of calm, of groundedness, of genuine creativity rather than reactivity. And then yours is the kingdom and the power and the glory, perhaps the most radical moment of Jesus' spiritual practice that we could pray together today at the Minneapolis International Airport. The power, the kingdom, the glory, these basic human addictions, the need for significance, the need for control, the need to be seen as important. Jesus says, let go of all of it and give it to God. And friends, this is the sobriety journey from our addiction to that which leads to supremacy, to authoritarianism, to these shabby, tired, endlessly replayed forms of acting out rather than being conscious, sober, powerful, grounded, creative agents. And so today to pray, yours is the kingdom and the power and the glory, with a whole line of police officers behind us with long-barreled guns and pistols, to say, all of this is yours. Then you can become fearless. You can become completely unintimidated, to kneel in a position of powerlessness, of harmlessness, with no fear, because you know that you're in the presence of God, and all of those neighbors who are looking us in the face and saying, we love you, we are with you. They were reminding us that we are in the presence of God in all places, at all times, with all people. And so we truly have nothing to fear, nothing to lose, without also having anything to win. Because this is not about winning, it's about belonging. Ah, so delightful, friends, so delightful. And then I had the privilege of reciting to us the Beatitudes of Jesus, the Beatitudinal Way, this manifesto that Jesus gave at the very beginning of his public movement. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those people who can acknowledge the deep poverty, the trauma, the sorrow that lives inside. The kingdom of heaven, the unconditional belonging and belovedness, embraces those who are willing to become aware of their own suffering, their own experience of deep pain, emptiness. Oh, friends, if we could even start here, then ICE would become irrelevant. ICE would melt. To be able to acknowledge our own inadequacy, our own insecurity. The next, blessed are the grieving, because they will be comforted. Jesus invites us to become these emotionally honest people who can process the deep emotions that live inside of us, including grief, mourning, radical sadness. Jesus, the next one, blessed are the nonviolent because they will inherit the earth. I mentioned that already. These are people whose agency has become creative rather than reactive, or become responsive and imaginative and innovative without recycling the known paths, the entrenched patterns of arrogance, of superiority, of domination, of control. Jesus says, when you can truly become a nonviolent person, then you can live on the earth forever, and the whole earth will belong to you. You will be at peace with the soil. You will be at peace with the trees. You will be at peace with the air and the water. You will be at peace with the birds. You will be at peace with the flowers. You will be at peace with our other animal siblings, our animal neighbors, and with fellow humans, because when you can enter into nonviolence, you can create and you can belong and you can work and you can rest without needing to fabricate and achieve these illusions of being separate from anyone else or being superior to anyone else. Friends, there's 8 moments in the beatitudinal way of Jesus. We recited those, and then I had the privilege of reading passages from Dr. Martin Luther King's letter from Birmingham jail, where Dr. King talks about why do we engage in nonviolent direct action and disrupt injustice in this way. Such beautiful words from Dr. King. And what I noticed, friends, was that these faith leaders were embodying this joyful, confident, grounded and peaceful sense of connection with one another and with the other people who were present in that protest, that direct action, and who had absolutely no fear of the police, and who were ready and willing to engage peacefully with the police, which is exactly what we did. And I loved seeing people dance there. I loved seeing people on their knees there. There was this sense of freedom to be in our bodies and to be together without any fists, without any kind of chipped shoulders, without any kind of pumped out chest. These people were strong enough to let go of that disguised ego insecurity. Just so lovely. And I wanted to say a word of gratitude for our fellow protesters who were in the green zone, who were in the non-arrestable area. These were people who were carrying beautiful signs about loving their neighbors. These were people who were smiling, who were raising their hands, and who were dancing, and who were sharing in the emanation of an energy of peace, an energy of freedom, an energy of reverence and respect for the dignity of the other. It was just such a lovely, lovely thing to share presence with each one of you. And the journalists that were present there, my friend Jack Jenkins from Religion News Service, and other journalists who were there documenting what we were doing, what we were saying, the demands that were being made, and the presence of goodness that was there. Friends, now I want to comment on the police. And I may end up revising what I'm about to say here, because I need to think about it more. Like I said, I usually like to engage in long-form writing that unfolds through sustained reflection. This is a live reflection. I perceived the police at the airport to be protesting with us against ICE. What I mean by that is these police officers were behaving in a very respectful, restrained, composed manner. They gave us the first warning. It was a bit surreal. We heard over the loudspeaker that we were breaking the law, that we had to remove ourselves immediately, and if we didn't, we would be arrested. And then there was a second warning, and then there was a third warning, and then the police began arresting us. And when they did that, the police did not say, fuck you. They weren't using any of this aggressive, insulting, degrading language that has been totally normalized by ICE. They were communicating with us in a humane, decent, respectful manner. They were putting zip ties on our hands. When they did that, in many cases, they didn't even tighten the zip tie. It was like we were wearing these large bracelets. I brought my zip ties home as a reminder, as a kind of what's the word that I'm looking here for? As a kind of a sacred object of this protest, this direct action against ICE fascism. The police didn't even tighten these zip ties on our wrists. There was no attempt to put us in physical pain or to kind of assert suffering on us, and so to make us feel like we had to submit ourselves to the police. I had a good chat with the police officer who arrested me. We took a selfie together. We talked about why we were here, and I expressed our respect for the rule of law, and that we were here precisely because we respect the law, and we want everyone's equal, inalienable rights as children of God to be respected in this society. And the police officer said that he understood that intent and that he respected that intent, and that we were then taken onto two school buses. There was, again, about 98 of us clergy faith leaders who were arrested, and 50 of us were put on one bus, 50 on another. And when we got into our bus, friends, the police officer came on the bus and he said, "All right, today I'll be your flight attendant for this journey." And we all busted into laughter. And there was just this sense of mirth, of levity, of hilarity, not because there was anything insignificant about us being arrested by the police, not because there was anything insignificant or trite or cheap about our engagement with law enforcement. Some of them have murdered George Floyd, or murdered Castile, or murdered others of our neighbors. So there's a recognition of the moral complexity, and in many cases the moral depravity of our police siblings. But in this case, there was a mutual respect and a mutual expression of our humanity that, for me, in the context of ICE in Minneapolis, felt like a kind of protest against ICE. That the police officers were doing their duty to arrest us because we had engaged in nonviolent direct action. We had broken the law. We had disobeyed the police. We had refused to move when we were warned 3 times, as Dr. King said, that direct action does this intentionally, and it does it with the awareness that you will be arrested, you will be punished in some form, and you accept that without any kind of retaliation. But the police did that in such a way that there was no attempt to humiliate us, or to cower us, or to try to make an example of us. And in light of the way that ICE has been behaving in Chicago, in Minneapolis, in Charlotte, out in Oregon and elsewhere, it felt like the police's way of speaking and behaving with us was a kind of subtle protest of ICE, and a subtle word of defiance against ICE, and a reminder of how any credible law enforcement deserving of the name does not speak and act and terrorize like ICE does. And so for this faith leader protester at the Minneapolis International Airport today, I couldn't help but feeling like the police were protesting with us and in solidarity with us against ICE. And that was also reflected in the way we were treated after we were arrested and we were taken to a private part of the airport, a non-public part of the airport. And the police, when they had given us our citations and we were being prepared to be released, they intentionally drove us to get closer to the pickup area where the march organizers were going to pick us up, so that we would not have to be in the negative 20-degree temperature any more than necessary in order to leave the airport and to continue with our days. This is the antithesis of ICE dropping people on the side of the road dropping them in parking lots, dropping them in random locations, and then expecting them to make their way home. Instead, the police were trying to make sure that we were as close as possible to our transportation and that we were not physically endangered in any way. And they asked several times if any of us were injured or if any of us needed medical care, which thankfully we did not. So I wanted to reflect on the police and how I perceived in this particular instance, at this particular direct action with this particular group of faith leaders behaving in the particular way that we were, that it almost felt like the police were protesting with us and that they were joining in solidarity against the brutality and the lawlessness and the arbitrariness and the fascistic quality of ICE, Homeland Security, Bavino, and their mercenaries. I wanted to reflect also, friends, that after we were released from the police and we began to journey back to our church, that we talked with one another. And there was again this sense of joy between these faith leaders. There was not a sense of heroism, triumphalism, of look how important we are, look at this big significant thing that we did, we've just changed the world a little bit. I heard faith leaders reflecting on the deep grief of, for example, one of these gentlemen who oversees 54 churches and saying, we already have a very challenged budget, and now on top of that we're trying to help people in 54 congregations be able to pay their rent, and we have leaders whose responsibilities are overflowing, and now on top of that we are trying to help our people experience some kind of basic mental health care and spiritual care and legal care, and it's just also challenging and overwhelming. And he was not speaking in any kind of self-pitying way. He was rather naming the reality of the ongoing struggle of what's taking place. Another thing that I appreciated is a faith leader naming that this feels like a self-inflicted wound. Why are we distracting ourselves with nonviolent direct actions at an airport? I myself driving 6 hours through a snowstorm to be there on little sleep. Now I'm driving home. My estimated time of arrival is at 2 a.m. Very little compared to what other faith leaders have sacrificed to be there. Why are we expending this energy? It's because our presence in order to... All right, I think we're back. Those who are seeking power have tried to solidify their power by staging a political spectacle of arresting people who are called garbage or scum or illegal or terrorist. All of these are forms of othering, friends. They're forms of making the other seem unrelated or less than ourselves, of the other being separated from us and us being superior to them. These wounds are self-inflicted because of that othering addiction to power in our leaders. And I appreciated how these faith leaders were not congratulating themselves and patting themselves on the back after this nonviolent direct action that resulted in our arrest at negative 20-degree weather that could have brought a confrontation with the lethal force of ICE. Instead, they were talking about the sense of moral responsibility that they carry in their communities. Someone else was talking about how much goodness is coming out of this great evil. This pastor was talking about how he knows more of his neighbors' names. He knows more of the neighbors of his church. And he knows more of their needs and their gifts, and that these people are coming together to aid one another, to empower and serve one another, to comfort and strengthen one another. They're living into the beatitudinal way of Jesus, of offering comfort and compassion and peacemaking. Hi, Amelia. I'm so grateful that you're listening. What a blessing. Amelia is one of my inspirations in my writing process for my last book, Reviving the Golden Rule. These faith leaders were talking about how so much goodness, so much neighbor love, so much reverence for life, so much dignity for the other is coming. Okay. So much goodness is coming out of the unmasking of the supremacist culture in the United States, the need for this elevated sense of significance over others. We're getting to know our neighbors. This was a really repeated theme in our training the day before our nonviolent direct action, where people were saying, get to know your neighbors, be with your neighbors, serve your neighbors, extend mutual aid with your neighbors. And I, as the co-founder of the Neighbor Love movement, think how ironically that dear leader, our beloved Trump, has unleashed a Neighbor Love movement in the United States by unleashing a secret police, domestic terrorist, mercenary group known as ICE, trying to divide and conquer the people who call this country home. In the process of doing that, ironically, there's an unintended consequence of solidarity, of compassion, of white people beginning to learn what it has been like for black and brown people to feel precarity in this country for 250 years. And before that, I mean, my dear white siblings who are listening to me, maybe we're just starting to get a little bit of a taste of what our Native American sisters and brothers, what our black and brown sisters and brothers, what our Asian sisters and brothers and siblings have felt in this country for centuries of, oh, I have the documents, but I don't know if they'll be respected. Oh, I haven't done anything wrong, but I don't know if that'll be respected. Oh, the law actually protects me, but I don't know if that'll be respected. Oh, I have rights that are written down in our Constitution and in our law code, and to which so-called law enforcement officers are accountable, but I don't know if it'll be respected. In this very bittersweet turning in our society, white people, people like me, white, straight, male, Christian, Protestant, blue-eyed, tall dudes, are becoming more familiarized with the experience of queer people in our society, of Native people who have always called this land, Turtle Island, their home. What an ironic blessing in disguise that the abusive authoritarian behavior of our power-hungry president is cultivating, at least in some of us, a deeper understanding of what so many people in this society have experienced for hundreds of years. And the thing is, friends, when we begin to understand one another, our fear begins to melt. We fear what we don't know. We allow the projection of these alien images on what is unfamiliar. But when you get to know the undocumented Mexican, for example, and you say, oh, these people are sucking the blood out of our society, you know, these horrifically dehumanizing images that Trump and Bondi and Stephen Miller and Russell Vogt and J.D. Vance and their clique of people, these dehumanizing terms that they use. When you begin to get to know these people, you say, oh my goodness, these people labor difficult, demanding jobs for long hours, and then they have no social security at all. They pay their taxes just like you and I pay their taxes, and they have no hope whatsoever to receive social security in our society, and they don't have the adequate processes to be able to go through making their legal status in this country right, because the system is so broken. And if anyone happens to be listening to this who disagrees with me, you're welcome to, but I have a very intimate knowledge of this because of the relationships that I share. The system is so broken, and people who are hardworking, law-abiding, family-building, in many cases profoundly Christian people who have been othered as bloodsuckers, freeloaders, these kind of parasitic insects on the body of the American people and the American homeland. When these people model a work ethic, family values, devotion to Jesus. Yes. When we begin to get to know one another, these enemy images, these othering images, they begin to melt away because they're unsustainable, because they're false. And lies are some of the, shabbiest, weakest, self-imploding things in the world. And so what an irony that Donald Trump, in his effort to try to inflame the old white supremacy, make America great again, be nostalgic for the past, try to go back in time, take your country back. In his agenda to do this, instead what we're seeing is a ramification, a thickening, a densifying of human connection and awareness and learning and shared experience and mutual aid. And this is what I call neighbor love, passionate will, practical work for our mutual well-being. What a lovely turn of events that Donald Trump, in unleashing a movement of othering, only with a thin veneer of plausible deniability, trying to remobilize white supremacy in American society, instead can backfire into the kind of spiritual character and initiative and courage that I have witnessed among the faith leaders of Minneapolis and in Minnesota, and who came in like me from Illinois and from Minnesota and South Carolina and from Massachusetts and all around this country. So I'm celebrating that in the aftermath of this nonviolent direct action and this symbolic and historic action in this significant place, in this significant city, that rather than these faith leaders having a private moment of self-congratulation, they were instead continuing to talk with one another about the challenges of their responsibility and their desire to contribute to the well-being of their neighbors and to learn the needs and desires and gifts of their neighbors, rather than that kind of white savior, white messiah project. Just so lovely. I can't resist naming something else. Friends, we were doing some really beautiful storytelling on that bus after we had been arrested. I was talking with a man named Dan. He was asking me where I minister, and I said, I minister at a tiny little Mennonite church on the far south side of Chicago, and inside of that church there's some really humble people that would hardly tell you about their lives, but these are people who participated in the civil rights movement and who marched with Dr. King. And Dan started telling me his own stories about how he had worked in that same neighborhood with that same congregation, with the Underground Railroad, of helping people move in the Great Migration from the terror of the Confederate South, or the Jim Crow South rather, into the North, and helping people move to a place of greater safety, greater freedom, greater opportunity as African American people. And I asked him, I said, Dan, how did you begin doing this work? He said, my grandmother took me to my first civil rights meeting. Imagine that, dear friends. I want to appreciate this. Our dear President, Dr. Donald Trump, is trying to tell us that we protesters are these agitators, these new kids on the block who don't know what we're doing. And I'm talking to this man named Dan, who's 78 years old, and he's telling me that it was his grandmother who took him to his first public demonstration on behalf of the dignity of all human life made in the image of God. Tell me that Dan is an agitator. Compare Dan's behavior with the kind of sophomoric, adolescent, infantile behavior of these enraged, explosive, short-fused white men wearing masks and calling themselves ICE. It's its own self-mockery. It is its own self-satire. I was hearing stories from women and men like Dan, and I was talking to this Catholic woman and asking her, why did she come to this protest? She was a woman many decades older than me. Why did you show up and do this? And she told me, I felt like something needed to be done. And I felt like this was my next step. I loved the humility and the simplicity of this woman's testimony to me. She had no idea that I was going to be talking about this on a public platform later. She didn't know who I was. I didn't know who she was. Just, why are you here? I felt like something needed to be done. And this is what I could do. And so this is what I did. And I'm here, and I was willing to get arrested, and I was willing to potentially face ICE, willing to potentially even lose my life, because I believe that my neighbors need to be protected and treated with respect. Tell me that that dear woman is an agitator. Tell me that that dear woman is a domestic terrorist. Tell me that that dear woman is being paid by someone in order to achieve some agenda of the left. Yes, these kinds of shabby fabrications unravel themselves. So I was delighted behind the scenes in this bus jail that we were inhabiting and singing in, that I was getting to talk with these siblings, these kin, about the rich spiritual heritage that we are continuing and that we are participating in together in the face of ICE. Just delightful. And then, friends, we went to march in downtown Minneapolis, many of us. And the thing that I wanted to point out from the march in Minneapolis was this. First, it was still negative 20 degrees. It was bitter cold. This was not, a sunny day on a beach, with refreshing drinks. This was an event that you had to choose to go to, that you had to prepare to go to, and that was very uncomfortable to be part of. My hands and my feet were hurting so bad because of many hours out in the cold by that point. And yet there were thousands and thousands and thousands of people there marching together, affirming the precious value of our democracy, of respect for human life, of our moral obligation to love our neighbors as ourselves. As you can imagine, I was absolutely thrilled and overjoyed to see how many people on their signs had messages of protect neighbors, love our neighbors. No human is illegal. They're our neighbor. Jesus said, love your neighbor as yourselves. So beautiful to witness. Another thing that I wanted to point out is that there was a lot of chanting of fuck Trump and fuck ICE. But that being said, there was just a lovely sense of respect. There was no hostile energy. There was no aggression or conflict in this river of people making its way through downtown Minneapolis. There were no altercations whatsoever. I didn't hear anyone use disrespectful or insulting language towards one another. Again, people were talking to each other and saying, why are you here? Oh, I love your sign. For example, someone said, empathy, not empire. And I said, I love your sign. And then she said back to me, I love your sign. My sign said that othering is our only enemy. There was this sense of collegiality, this sense of solidarity and togetherness, this kind of inherited sense of family, because we're coming out in public on behalf of freedom and truth and justice. Just so lovely. The other thing that I noticed is I did not see a single police officer on that march. My phone died because it was so cold and I didn't have a watch on, so I don't know how long we were marching. It was at least over an hour, if not more. And I encountered thousands and thousands of people. We didn't see a single police officer. And there was no need whatsoever for police to be present in order for people to behave in an orderly and respectful and law-abiding manner. These were citizens. These were people who were able to govern themselves. They were free people, self-governing people coming out on the day of truth and freedom to express their desire to be part of an ongoing constitutional democracy where human life is valued. And I just thought it was absolutely delightful that there was no need for, law enforcement parents to be there to make sure that us kids behaved ourselves. We were able to take care of ourselves and to govern ourselves and to make our message clear without any destruction of property, without any harm to other people around us, without any need to express intimidating words towards anyone else. None at all. In fact, again, we did it in a spirit of joy, despite this being negative 20-degree weather. The fact that we were protesting moral atrocities like Renee Good being shot and killed and called a fucking bitch, and that little boy being detained, and that elder being forced out of his home in his shorts, in his sandals in the snow, and that dear woman who identified as autistic going to her medical appointment being ripped out of her car by ICE. And the ICE agents kneeing a man in the face over and over again, and you can hear him groaning in pain. We were out demonstrating against this grave moral atrocity with grief and with rage. But we didn't need law enforcement with guns and tasers and with tear gas to keep us in line as these kinds of barbaric, uncivilized agitators. Oh, the day of truth and freedom. Such joy. Jesus says you will know the truth and the truth will set you free. Oh, there's just something so happy, so beautiful, so good about the self-governance that comes out of the life of seeking truth, of seeking a freedom that is not freedom from others, but is freedom for others. It is a life of mutual responsibility, together seeking belonging, rather than seeking some kind of competitive superior identity. So good. So good. And this is why, friends, in the beatitudinal way, Jesus says, blessed, 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 blessed. That word means happiness, wholeness, a quality of life that is sacred and integrated, a quality of life that is deeply alive. And Jesus says that, yes, even as you work through your poverty, you work through your grief, you work through the fear of practicing nonviolence in the face of violence, you work through your hunger and thirst for justice when you see people being terrorized by the political theater of authoritarianism that our president has unleashed in our society. Even so, you're blessed. Even so, you're happy. You experience moments of what Eddie Hilson called a strange state of mournful contentment. And that was my experience today and yesterday in Minneapolis with my fellow faith leaders. Native American, women, men, trans people, queer people. These identitarian labels might make some of my listeners feel threatened. That's okay. That's okay. Jesus says you will know them by their fruit. And I ask myself, what is the fruit that I witnessed from these siblings? And what I witnessed was love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, self-control. I witnessed a deep reverence for God and a deep love for neighbor, not just in cerebral ideas or in verbalized doctrines or in institutionalized spaces of orthodoxy. I witnessed this in the embodied act of courageous love with and for people who are being oppressed in a society that calls itself the greatest nation on earth. And so, friends, blessed, 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 not as a cheap bumper sticker or as some kind of consumer commodity item, but as what it means to be human, to come home to one another and ourselves and God and the earth, the air, the water, the flowers. Robin, I see you. Robin and I love the flowers. Yes, friends. So There's a poem that I love. My friends know that I love this poem. It was written by W.H. Auden. It's called The Garrison. And at the end of this poem, W.H. Auden says that to serve as paradigms now of what a plausible future might be is what we're here for. And what I experienced in Minnesota with my fellow faith leaders is paradigms of a plausible future, a way of being human that can endure, that can survive. Now, friends, this is the black radical survival of Audre Lorde. This is not the survival of the cheap, cheap Charlottesville white supremacists saying, "You will not replace us." This is the survival of people who have learned to suffer without allowing that suffering to need to be inflicted upon other people, but rather to integrate it, to do the beatitudinal work of poverty, of grief, of nonviolence, of justice, of compassion, cleansing of the heart, letting go of any othering, superiority, any supremacy, then becoming a peacemaker who's a child of God, and then entering into the mystery of being persecuted for the sake of justice. Whew. Yeah, it's an Audre Lorde survival, and not the survival of the frightened, the survival of the fearful, the survival of the one who needs to feel like they're more important than someone else, or that they're have a bigger footprint on the earth than someone else. What joy, what joy. I think I'm going to wrap up this this live reflection with our dear brother James Baldwin. James Baldwin said in his book, The Fire Next Time, that people who can't suffer can never grow up. People who can't suffer can never grow up. Now, James Baldwin, he was anything but someone who was out there seeking suffering. James Baldwin grew up in New York City. He was a black boy who was a shoe shiner, who was sexually assaulted by police officers. He worked in a factory and he served in the military, and he was disgusted by how prisoners of war were treated better than African American people in the military. James Baldwin is a man who knew suffering and who certainly did not desire to experience any more suffering. And yet, James Baldwin had the adulthood, the maturity, the evolved development to know that those who can't suffer can never grow up. Because what it means to be an adult is not necessarily to be married. It's not necessarily to have a house or an important job or money or kids or a retirement plan. What it means to be an adult and to grow up is to be someone who knows how to integrate your pain in a constructive and creative way that can contribute to the well-being of others. We all know that there's no escaping pain. To be human is to experience suffering. But can we learn how to turn that suffering and pain into the energy of healing? And this is when, you could say that our anger shifts to rage, that our self-pitying shifts to grief, that our desire for significance converts into the desire for our mutual dignity, that our desire for our safety and our freedom leads to what is called the common good, or what Dr. King called the beloved community. James Baldwin understood this. He said, those who can't suffer never grow up. And he said something else. James Baldwin said that in order for a collection of people to become a nation, a kind of cohesive community, it's necessary for them to grow up from their dangerous adolescence. He was speaking about the United States as a dangerously adolescent country, a country that talks about being the greatest nation on earth, the most powerful military on earth, sending the most missionaries around the world on earth, making the best products on earth, etc., etc., etc. And yet, one of the very, very violent democratic societies with so much sickness and loneliness and lack of access to basic care for our bodies and souls, and a prison industrial complex with more jailed human beings than any other contemporary democracy, other than like South Africa under apartheid. James Baldwin said that our dangerously adolescent society needs to grow up. And that growing up happens through learning how to process our suffering. And I witnessed that today and yesterday with these beloved faith leaders and our fellow siblings who joined us in this nonviolent direct action and in this protest in Minneapolis. And I feel very hopeful to be an American at this time. And I must say that for me, being an American doesn't mean anything special. It doesn't mean that I'm better or bigger or have some sort of special destiny than anybody else. It just means that I was born here. It just means that this is the place where the law of the land plays a significant role in my life, and where I have proximity to a lot of neighbors. And I'm hopeful that as we grow in this way of nonviolent spirituality that follows in the way of Jesus and other great and good and humble and wise and gentle and powerful spiritual leaders, that we will do the work of learning how to grow up by learning how to suffer in the way of love. That's what we experienced today. And friends, if you're listening, I just want to say thanks for sharing this journey with me, and for reflecting with me. We live in an age of infinite content, where there's a need for spectacle and eyeballs, the information economy, where everyone is trying to get to make something by getting people to pay attention and listen. And that's not the intention here. And I want to thank you for doing the human work of reflecting on our times, what's happening, and what we're doing, and where we're going together in these pivotal turning point moments in our society. Not like a turning point USA that's trying to take back our country with that nostalgic, musty, white supremacist energy, but is rather a turning point where we're trying to engage in metanoia, in repentance, in the renewal of our minds, in the non-conformity of spiritual devotion to divine love. So thank you for reflecting with me. And as I said in my message when I was arrested in that bus, I'm really deeply grateful for my friend Mark accompanying me on this journey. I had written an email to some of the coaches and mentors and dear friends in my life after I found out about Philip Yancey's affair in his marriage, and just expressed my desire for a deep and accountability and integrity. And my friend Mark responded to that email and he said, "Hey, if you're traveling, let me know. I'll travel with you. I'll be with you." And I said, "Mark, I feel a moral obligation to be at this protest. Would you come with me?" And he did. He flew in last night, and we went to this nonviolent direct action together, and Mark was with me every step of the way. And I think, wow, what a paradigm of a plausible future, a kind of quality of friendship where you say, like, I need your presence at this time in my life. Could be dangerous. It could get escalated. I trust you. You're wise. You're composed. You have a lot of experience in these kind of unpredictable, high-stress situations. Would you accompany me? And he says, yes. And he pays the money to buy an airplane ticket and to rent in a hotel room. And then he gives me like his whole weekend. What incredible friendship. If more of us could befriend one another in these ways, we could learn how to suffer in a way that's constructive and in a way that leads to our mutual healing and liberation. I want to say thank you to my friend Robin Riley, who just sent me some money on Venmo. She knew that I was going to be driving a couple hundred miles up to Minnesota, and she just wanted to make sure that I had the money that I needed for gas and for food. What an act of love. What an act of generosity. I didn't reach out to Robin and say, hey, could you help me out here? she reached out to me and said, I think that this is important. I want you to know that I'm with you, but I'm all the way over in California, so let me just send some money so that you know that I'm with you and that you have what you need. Thank you, Robin. There's another dear woman from Minnesota. I confess that I can't remember her name because I don't know who she is. And she just sent me a random message on Facebook Messenger and said, hey, I read what you write, and I appreciate the message that you are sharing, and you said you're coming to Minneapolis, and I just want to make sure that you get there all right, so let me send you $100. I was so touched by that. I'm a stranger to her, she's a stranger to me, and yet there's this thick sense of solidarity. So deeply appreciative. I have another friend named Robin who texted me tonight and said, hey, if you're getting dinner after your arrest, send me the bill. I want to pay for it. What a beautiful act of generosity and care that after a stressful day, which was also a very joyful and beautiful day, that my friend Robin just said, hey, I want you to know that I'm with you and I want you to feel cared for. Friends, this is mutual aid. This is accompaniment. This is shared presence. This is what resistance looks like. And I want to just conclude this live reflection by expressing my deep gratitude to many friends like this. My friend Aaron, who invited me to stay in his apartment for free, to sleep on a mattress in his floor. We had such meaningful conversations about the Bible, about the meaning of what it is to be an American, past and present, and making sure that I had food and water and warmth in his home. What an act of incredible, beautiful hospitality, where I just said, hey, Aaron, I need a place to stay. Is that possible? Please come. And his home became my home for a weekend. What love. I mean, this is what Jesus mentioned when he says that if you follow me, that you'll have 100 houses. Jesus wasn't preaching the prosperity gospel. He wasn't saying you're going to have a private jet and a vacation home on the beach. He's saying that when you live in this kind of radical kinship, as my friend Dave says, that you will have a deep fabric of relationship where people will open their homes to one another, and that you will become family to one another, and you'll have a bed that you need, you'll have food and drink that you need, and it probably won't be, a lot of surplus, a lot of extra, but instead it will be what you need. Just like Jesus taught us to pray, give us today our daily bread. Be enough rather than the exorbitant, the abundant rather than the excessive. So thank you to Aaron. I want to say thank you to my friend Peter. Peter is one of the organizers of this program and training and nonviolent action, and Peter just was so gracious in responding to text messages and many questions to make sure that I and others were prepared to engage this with the responsibility that we needed. And Peter is also a father. Peter is also the executive director of Peace Catalyst International. And yet again, there's this commitment to being accessible and to being dialogical and answering questions. And I just thought, how lovely, what a beautiful example of leadership, that in a very demanding, intense, full time, that Peter would make himself available so that others could feel empowered to make wise decisions together, rather than being reckless or making unnecessary mistakes. I could go on and on. There are so many examples of this, of people who have shared money or resources or wisdom or housing or encouragement, or simply saying, we're with you. We want you to know that you're not alone. My friend Marianne sending me a song, sending me a text message from Guatemala, letting me know that she's with me. My friend Nate sending me a text message from Guatemala. My friend Sarah in Ethiopia, and in the Netherlands, sending me a text message of encouragement. Yes, friends. Yes, this is the way. This is the beatitudinal way of blessing and becoming human. So, what a joy it is to be heading home now. My map says that my ETA is 2:30 a.m., so prayers appreciated for a safe arrival back home, and then I will begin teaching my course on Dietrich Bonhoeffer at Fourth Presbyterian Church in Chicago on Michigan Avenue on Sunday morning at 11 a.m. That will be live streamed. It seems like a really important and relevant time to be talking about Dietrich Bonhoeffer. So grace and peace to all of you. May we enter into that strange state of mournful contentment, of learning how to integrate our suffering into the creative energy of healing, of our poverty opening the way to the kingdom of heaven, our grief opening the way to comfort, our nonviolence opening the way to a new earth, our longing for justice leading to a new abundance and fullness. This is the way of love, of peace, of hope, of Jesus. So grace and peace to you all tonight, dear friends. I hope that you rest well, and as I travel from Minneapolis, extend just a word of deep condolences to Renee Good's family and all of the families who can't drive away, who can't go home, whose families no longer have a home, or whose families' homes feel like crime scenes and war zones because these masked federal mercenaries are inflicting terror on our neighbors for the sake of the consolidation of power of lustful, insecure leaders. So as I drive, I carry in my heart the sobriety of our Minnesotan neighbors, of our Chicago neighbors, of our Charlotte neighbors, of our Venezuelan neighbors, of our Palestinian neighbors, of neighbors near and far around the earth who are experiencing suffering, injustice, authoritarianism, ethnic cleansing, genocide. Oh, blessed are the peacemakers, because they will be called the children of God. Blessed are the persecuted for the sake of justice, because theirs is the kingdom of heaven. When we say yes to heaven, when we say yes to unconditional belonging and belovedness, we become invincible. Nothing to lose, nothing to prove. Grief, yes. Rage, yes. Vulnerability, yes. Fear, yes. And yet fearlessness, and yet happiness, and yet the confidence of a new beginning in which all will be well, not as a cheap prosperity gospel denial of reality, but as the capacity to let go of a dangerous adolescence, to suffer, to take up our cross and follow, and to discover that on the other side of death is resurrection, and that death, the last enemy, is our friend, and to be loved, because it delivers us into the next chapter of our unconditional belovedness and belonging with God and with one another. Friends, thank you for sharing this journey with me. I'm so grateful for you. Thank you for all of your comments. I would love to hear what you think about all of this. I'd love to hear what questions it stirs for you, or what reflections, or what differences of opinion or perspective it stirs in you. Let's continue walking together, hand in hand, or at least phone in phone, screen in screen. Yes, my gratitude to you all tonight. Good night.